As we get ready to wrap up 2024 here on the Be Worth Following podcast, I just want to say thank you. Thank you to the ever-growing tribe of folks connected to what we're doing here. We're so excited that you are joining us and continuing to grow in this conversation around leadership and culture. Now, when you have new folks joining the tribe, that means there are some really great episodes that they haven't had a chance to hear. So to wrap up 2024, we are going to do a throwback episode. We are going to go back in time to October of 2022 and our conversation with Tria Deibert. Tria works at Hackensack Meridian Health, and they are doing some exceptional things around the development of their culture, and they're doing it incredibly efficiently from a financial standpoint. Now, far be it from me to say that we shouldn't invest dollars in culture and leadership. That would be awfully hypocritical of me. But I think it's amazing what Tria and her team are pulling off in terms of how they organize it. But of course, you're going to hear it does take an exceptional person to do that, and Tria is that person. Hindsight has given me the opportunity to continue to track along with what Tria is doing at Hackensack Meridian Health, and it's just impressive is the best way that I can describe it. So I'm excited as we wrap up 2024 to do this throwback episode so that more and more people can get to hear and learn from Tria. So let's go back in time to our episode on the Be Worth Following podcast with Tria Deibert.
We are a small part of the organization, but the ripple effect of what we do is immense. And so when you think about pebbles, right, if you have more pebbles, you create more ripples. And so that's what our culture champions do. They're not paid for being a culture champion. It's a voluntary position, but they are all individuals who believe in the organization and who also, I would say, their souls lit on fire by this type of work.
The most organic and effective means of scaling culture is to create opportunities for authentic buy-in. I'm your host, Tim Spiker, and this is the Be Worth Following podcast, a production of the People Forward Network. On this show, we talk with exceptional leaders, thinkers, and researchers about what actually drives effective leadership across the globe and over time. You just heard from Tria Deibert, the Vice President of Culture at Hackensack Meridian Health. HMH, as it is known, is a 35,000-member network of healthcare providers. Tria moved into the VP of Culture role from a very unexpected spot in the organization. Her unique expertise prior to being in this role is something that she leverages every single day. But where Tria came from isn't the only unexpected part of her work. Wait until you hear about the structure and size of her department. When Tria made the move to VP of Culture, it lit her on fire in all the best ways. She now creates opportunities for others to experience that very same jolt. And in doing so, she is fostering something that every organization needs: organic and authentic cultural alignment. Tria's move into her current role came at a time in her life that taught her more than one important lesson about leadership. And that is where we begin.
The things that really have shaped me as a leader, also as a person in the past few years particularly, are self-discovery, becoming a mother, and changes I experienced with my leadership. And I can dig into those a little bit. So on the self-discovery piece, I was a marketer by background and spent a lot of my career in sort of a stand and deliver type of role. And even in my early career, it was in ad sales. So as I moved into healthcare, I started to look at the world a little bit differently. But I will say my 40s, I just turned 50, my 40s were a time of really great, deep discovery. It helped me become more self-aware, but it was through things like learning about my strengths, doing strengths assessments, and going to grad school. So I decided to go back to school when I was in my, as my son would say, late 40s. He gave me a birthday card that said happy late 40s. But I went back to grad school because I felt like there was a bit of a gap as I shifted from marketing to culture. And what I really found during that time was not that I took so much away from learning about different theories. That was great. It was important. But the opportunity to reflect on what I was learning and how I was showing up was incredible. So I feel like during that time, and again, this also ties into being a mother, I had a lot of time where I was thinking about how I show up as a person, how I show up as a mother, the things I see in my child that I want to work on myself, right? They're great mirrors. You can see your strengths and you can see your opportunities in your children sometimes. And so I feel like that all kind of came together in a way that helped me look inward and change how I was showing up as a leader.
What I love about that story and all of those pieces coming together is it points out this growth trajectory for us doesn't end. It doesn't stop at 30. What are the opportunities that we have to continue? Certainly, the very best leaders never stop growing and developing. And you're also talking about in meaningful places. You're not like, well, I shaved a rough edge off of this one skill. You're talking about self-awareness and how you show up. And I think that that's so important for all of us to be reminded of, is that, yes, there is this thing called the formative years, but we mistakenly lean into sometimes the logical but inaccurate notion that we're fully baked at the age of 30. Now, you mentioned in there something that I knew that we wanted to get into, because you're helping to scale culture and leadership development within a sizable organization, but your background begins in marketing. So walk us through that, because that is not your standard path towards culture and leadership development.
I always talk about my career as definitely it wasn't a straight path. As a little girl, I never thought about working in culture. Honestly, as a little girl, I never thought about working in marketing. I wanted to be a waitress. But what I have discovered is I spent a lot of time thinking about my purpose. And my purpose is to architect ideas, experiences, and programs that have a positive impact on individuals, organizations, and communities. That's a little wordy, but really it's about creating experiences that have an impact. And I love that. I'm more of a builder than a sustainer. I love to create. And I was afforded that in marketing for sure, but absolutely in culture as well. And so I think in addition to my purpose, the skills that you have in marketing to package an idea and to really convey the why, getting people to understand what's important, helped me in my work in culture. Because initially, right, the idea of how we're going to move forward together as we were a newly merged organization, you really have to capture people's minds and hearts and do it in a way that they can remember, that makes sense, and that is authentic. So language can be beautiful and not meaningful. It's really about finding language that is beautiful, but meaningful to the people who are hearing it. They need to be able to see themselves, see the possibility, see the future in what you're talking about. And I think those are some of the skills that I brought to that role.
Speaking of language being beautiful and meaningful, that statement packs a punch that's worth simmering on a little bit. I want to go backwards just a little bit. You and I had a chance to speak earlier about this moment when you are asked to play, come on over to the culture side of things here. And I think it would be great for those listening to hear a little bit about that moment, specifically who that message came from and how that unfolded for you, because it is such a unique story.
It was an interesting moment for me too. So at the time, I was working in marketing, but my title was Vice President of Experience Marketing. So a lot with our customer and patient experience. And our Chief Strategy Officer, Jim Blazer, who I'll mention by name because he's amazing, he pulled me aside and said, we're about a year into the merger and we've done a lot in a year, really a lot. And we had done a significant amount of work. We had launched a new brand. And he said, we feel as though the culture of the organization needs a little nurturing, and we feel like you're the person to do it. Frankly, I was dumbfounded. And I looked at Jim and I said, I have a significant concern. And he said, okay, tell me what it is. And I said, I'm not a culture expert. And he said, I know that, but I still think this is the right opportunity for you. And looking back now, it was a moment where a leader that I worked with understood my strengths and understood how to leverage them. And so sometimes leaders can help you see, oftentimes that's the role of a leader, right? To help you see where you can go, a path you might not have taken, but because they understand who you are, they understand what drives you, and they understand your strengths. And I will tell you, moving into this role lit my soul on fire. It was like, it was the job I never thought I'd have that I fell in love with.
Here's something that's super important, in my opinion, about what you just said. If we want to be our best as leaders, that we need to find those places that light your soul on fire. And in this case, Jim invited you into a space that you hadn't previously considered. So thank goodness he did that. But as we're all kind of searching for our highest and best contributions, are we also saying, what lights my soul on fire? What really gets me going? Because when that fire is lit, then all of the skills, the new stuff, the old stuff, all of it has extra energy. So it's amazing that as Jim invited you into that's what you found on the other side. But in that exact moment when you're saying, okay, I'm not a culture expert, and Jim says, okay, yes, I'm aware of that. How did you give permission to yourself to say, all right, I'm going to give this thing a go?
I definitely hesitated, and I took a little time to think about it, but I pretty much knew my answer right away. And like I said, I'm a builder and I love to create, and I saw this as an opportunity to build something new that was meaningful, right? To have that impact on our team. And so it was what prompted me to go back to school. I never went back for my MBA because, frankly, the idea of statistics was just not appealing. I always found a reason not to go back for my MBA. And I grew up in a place that education was like something that not everybody had the benefit of. So when I was growing up, as I look back at my formative years, right, my mother actually said to me at one point, "Are you sure you want to go to college and you just don't want to go to beauty school?" And neither of my parents graduated from high school. And so, one of the things that I think is my strengths is drive, right? So I may not be the fastest runner, but I'm going to run until I get better. I may not be the best at this, but I'm going to keep going. So I think what excited me about the opportunity was that it was this moment where, as I've had at other points in my career, I had the opportunity to do something completely different. But that was exciting to me, that I felt was a stretch, but that I felt there would be a benefit in the end. And I will tell you, the first year that I was in that role, I didn't know what imposter syndrome was, but I had it. I remember a moment sitting in my leader's office. She was an amazing leader. I'll also mention her by name, Nancy Corcoran-Davidoff. And I remember sitting there and saying to her, "I just worry that I'm not enough for this." And she was great. We had a wonderful conversation, but it felt really big and it felt really, really like a stretch at that point. And I wanted to make sure I love my organization. I wanted to make sure I was giving my organization what it needed. So I will say that first year for me was probably the hardest year in my professional career. I was super uncomfortable in that role, but I shared that with a younger team member at one point when I was doing skip level meeting. And she looked at me and she said, "I wish more leaders said stuff like that, because I never would have thought that you felt like that. You always look so confident. You're so excited. You're so passionate. I had no idea that you were feeling that way. And I think it would help us as we're coming up to know that other women leaders have these feelings." And so it's kind of a roundabout answer there to your question, but it was a great opportunity. I welcomed the opportunity, but I was very uncomfortable that first year, but I prevailed. There's the drive again. It's been worth it.
So how long now have you been in this position?
Initially, this position in culture was supposed to be an internal leave of absence, so it would have been for a year. So I was stepping away from my position to do this for a year. Then it turned into a full-time role for me and a new role for the organization. And so I was in this role officially probably January of 2019. So about a year before COVID hit.
And that brings up an interesting point. You're wading into new waters. You're learning. And now as Tria leads the organization towards more effective culture development and leadership development, and welcome to COVID. So as you throw that into the mix, let's hear a little bit about that, because we all understand what a unique time that was, especially early on when we were all trying to understand what the reality of this thing was. And yet, especially working in healthcare, that doesn't shut down. That's got to continue. And obviously, many of our healthcare workers were the most taxed in all of society with everything that was going on from a physical and emotional standpoint. What was that like for you, still being relatively new into the space?
Yeah, when COVID hit, like everyone else, we thought, okay, this will be a temporary glitch. And obviously it was not. I will tell you, it really helped me grow into the role because I had to think about things very differently. Every day, all I wanted to do was put my arms around our team members. I know all of our leaders felt that way. It was in some ways like our finest moment as leaders because everyone stepped up to do things differently to support the team and the organization. And so some of the things I would have regularly done, I couldn't do anymore. And so we all thought, what are the things we can do right now to best serve the organization? And mine fell in a couple of areas, one being new ways to recognize and appreciate the team members. And so the typical things that we did involved gathering, and we couldn't do that anymore. So we went virtual with a lot of stuff. I'll give you a few examples of that. But it was challenging to gather. But I will tell you that in that year, so going into COVID, we had 4 core beliefs. So we had our 4 C's: creative, courageous, compassionate, and collaborative. And in 2020, we came up with a week called HMH Week. And it was an opportunity to celebrate every team member at HMH. And so that first year, we used that week to introduce a new core belief, which was connected. And it was very intentional because the things that I heard over and over and over again that year were that people had become more connected to purpose and more connected to one another. And so this goes back to that language can be meaningful and beautiful. It has to be meaningful. This was literally the voice of our team. Me hearing over and over and over again that people felt this way and memorializing it with an additional core belief. And so we rolled it out that week in a fun and unique way. We had Rainn Wilson from The Office as our first speaker.
Oh my goodness. Dwight.
Definitely one of the highlights of my career was interviewing him. But we promoted that night, that virtual event. We had huge attendance, and he revealed the 5th C.
I'm grinning from ear to ear at the creativity. There's something meaningful, but you're like, okay, just because it's meaningful, that doesn't mean that we're just going to stop there. We're going to pull out all the stops. So you get somebody like Rainn Wilson involved. How cool is that?
It was fun. And so HMH Week is now one of our traditions. We're coming up on HMH Week in October, and this year we're gathering. So I'm so excited that it's not virtual. But so that was one of the things that we looked at was how do we celebrate team members differently? And halfway through the height of the pandemic, when we hit that really big second wave, what I started to hear from our team was we no longer see the clap outs from the community. We no longer see the support. We're coming back into work. It's another wave of COVID. I see the morgue trucks outside. I'm tired. And where is the community? And so for me, that was a moment where I thought, okay, how do we step up and support the team where they used to have the community? And again, we have amazing leaders in our organization. Our senior leaders committed to going out and doing clap outs. This was now January and February. It was freezing in New Jersey. We did candlelight clapouts with music and signs, and like our CEO was at all of these clapouts. It was the top leaders of the organization coming out and standing in the cold just to say thank you and to recognize the team members. And we handed out hot cocoa bombs, and it was just fun. But literally, there were team members who would burst into tears when they saw us because they felt the love. And that was the goal, right? Not to make them cry, but for them to feel the love. So those were some of the ways. And then we also launched a new program for our team members during that time. So again, we're still a young organization. We're only 6 years old. And at that point, we had a few different team member relief funds from sort of legacy foundations. And my leader asked me if we would take it on and package up one program for all team members, because what we were seeing was really a huge financial crisis for our team members, because many of them had spouses who lost their jobs and they were struggling to pay the bills, and they were still coming into work and giving their all and taking care of patients. We've helped nearly 2,500 team members, a lot of them during the height of COVID.
Just to give people a sense of scope, how many team members across the system are we talking about?
35,000 team members. So we're a pretty large organization.
You know, one of the things that comes through loud and clear, Tria, is your priority in listening to the people in the organization. Talk a little bit about your commitment to and value of making sure that you're listening. You're not just putting the culture on top of people, but you're listening to people to understand where things are and what those needs are.
The big joke all the time when I talk about our engagement survey, and it's not a joke, is that I print out and read all of the comments. And so I go old school there. I literally print out, it's 1,000 pages, whatever it might be. And I sit down and I read all of the comments, because I do think if people take the time to share their feedback, we need to be listening. And so obviously it's not on me to respond to everything that is shared in that survey. Our frontline leaders get their results, so they see comments from their team as well. But it really gives me a deep look into the organization and helps me understand what some of the consistent themes are. That's one way we listen. I will say the biggest success in our story is our culture champions. And so when I came into this role, even though my background, right, was more of a stand and deliver type of opportunity, I was more of a driver. I really learned that you get the best product when you let up a little bit of control. That was before, when I talked about becoming a mother, that taught me that, right? You can't control everything. You have to be open to what's going to happen and let people be who they're going to be. But you get the best outcome when you involve other people in the work. And so for the work we did initially and still do, we're having a culture champion meeting this afternoon. We meet every month religiously. I have about 50 culture champions across the network that span our geography. And as a team, we talk about themes. I do set strategy based on what we're hearing, and I do create tools for them, but then they operationalize that in a way that makes sense for their environment, because we have so many different parts of the organization, some that have their own deep and rich traditions, and some that are hospitals and some that are physician practices. And so they are incredible individuals who help us listen to the organization, because they provide that bidirectional opportunity. They're taking out the strategy, they're taking out the message, but they're bringing back to us what they're hearing from different parts of the organization. And you can't say enough about the value of listening. We also do a lot of spot surveys when we're going to make a change. The first year that I was doing this work, I did breakfast with the CEO, and we went out, and I think I had breakfast with 1,000 people that year.
That's a lot of eggs, Tria. That's a whole lot of eggs.
It was. But it was just an opportunity for us to go out and hear from the team, and for our CEO to spend time with the team members and hear what their ideas, hear their thoughts, hear their feedback. And so we practice listening across the organization.
I'm thinking about the size of your team. the 150 people that are full-time salary doing nothing but culture, which is not exactly what you have structured going on. So share a little bit about your team. Everybody, I'm using quote fingers, but we'll share it with you, the scope and how this works for them.
I have a team of 3, and that's including me. And so I will say, when I did my standout assessment, my strength was connector pioneer. So I definitely look to build relationships in the organization to help advance what we're doing. And that's one of my strengths, right? Understanding what other people in the organization do and how they can help us move this along. But we are a very small team. And at one point, 2 years ago, I think it was for Christmas, I gave them pebbles on a necklace. It was a silver pebble, because we talk about ourselves as pebbles in the organization. We are a small part of the organization, but the ripple effect of what we do is immense. And so when you think about pebbles, right, if you have more pebbles, you create more ripples. And so that's what our culture champions do. They're not paid for being a culture champion. It's a voluntary position. Some are respiratory therapists, some are unit secretaries, some are leaders in a corporate space. But they're all individuals who believe in the organization and who also, I would say, their souls lit on fire by this type of work. And they have helped us carry this forward. So the first year when we were introducing our new mission, vision, and beliefs, we focused on one core belief each quarter. And so I packaged up all the tools for the culture champions, and we gave them toolkits for each of the core beliefs. And we gave them a budget to do events. And I will tell you, I am so glad I didn't tell them, here's how you should launch creative. You should have this type of event. The marketer in me cringed because I would see them drawing our logo, and I let that go.
Wait a second, that logo's not scaled correctly. You stretched it, all that kind of stuff, right?
Yep, I let that go because I thought, oh my gosh, this is magic. People are so invested in how we're going to move this forward. And so I never would have thought that one of our culture circles for compassionate would have created a Christmas in July tree and make it a giving tree for one of our nursing homes. And so that's how that group celebrated that core belief. They found a way to bring joy to, and they weren't a nursing home, they were accounts payable. And so it was this great, great moment where I thought, if I had told them to do X, Y, or Z, I would have never seen this outcome. And everybody did it differently, but I will tell you, I stand behind the fact that if you walk through our organization and you ask people what our 5 C's are, they can tell you.
It's a cautionary tale to not judge too quickly when you hear certain numbers, because I can see a scenario where you have a 35,000 member organization and there's 3 people working full-time in the development of culture, and somebody might automatically conclude this organization is not deeply committed to having an exceptional culture. And then when you hear more of the story of how this is unfolding in the organization with 50 culture champions that are volunteering their efforts to help perpetuate and develop and improve the culture of the organization, the reality is just the opposite of what it might appear on paper. It's a really remarkable story, and I love the way that you're unfolding it. Now, these culture champions, volunteering from all different walks of the organization, they have additional people they work with on site, as I understand it, that expands that culture team even beyond those 50. Can you talk a little bit about that?
There's that ripple effect again. So we have culture champions who meet monthly with us. We meet as a team, but they all have culture circles. And it really has expanded our reach into the organization. It has helped us make things sticky because we have so many people who are really committed to what we're doing. And so the culture champions, huge part of our success. Culture circles, huge part of our success. And then I will also say, having a CEO who talks about the importance of culture, who models it, who spends time listening to team members, also a huge part of our success. So I was fortunate in this role to have the support in both areas.
You're getting so many people involved ultimately, which has a huge impact in people's commitment to and ownership of what you're doing. And in addition to all the listening that you get to do back through the organization, through these groups, you also get to connect outward from your department, from your seat where you sit, through not just 2 or 3 or 5 people, but through a much larger network, through your culture champions and your culture circles. And I think it's just brilliantly thought out and executed. You're going to have to admit at some point, Tria, that you're a culture expert. I don't know when you want to admit that, but I'm willing to admit it on your behalf right now in front of everybody as they're listening, because the things that you're sharing that you're doing are really, really brilliant in my opinion. There's a couple of detailed things that I want to make sure that we talk about because I think they're really unique and they fit in this storyline of organic culture development, I guess is one way I could put it, but it's not necessarily the big, huge things, although I'm hearing that sometimes you do big, huge things, which I love. But let's talk about Fill Your Cup Friday. I think it's a really unique thing, and I love the growth story of it. So talk a little bit about how it got started and then where it's at today.
I have an exceptional team, and Mary Bezkowski is our director, and we were talking one day about, this was during COVID when people were really struggling, right? It was a lot of trauma. And we would, as leaders in the organization who see all the recognition coming in on our platform, we would see all these great notes and it would fill our cup. So we thought, well, how can we fill our leaders' cups? Because they're right now really working hard through this crisis and lifting their team up. How can we fill their cups? And so I did not have, and this is going to sound so technical, but I did not have email permissions for all of our leaders at that time. I only had email permissions for our VP and above group. And so organically, I just started every Friday. We would package up some of the great recognitions that we had, and I would send them out. But then I started putting my own personal piece in as time went on, and it became more about something that had filled my cup that week. And that sounds very self-centered, but it was always something that relayed back to leadership or recognition in some fashion. And what happened was I started getting these great emails back from our leaders because I would share things like a moment with my son that filled my cup, or one was focused on, because everyone talks about work-life balance. And when I was pregnant with my son, I thought, how am I ever going to achieve that? How am I ever going to be a great mom and grow in my career? And one of my friends said, it's a myth. You're never going to find work-life balance. It's a seesaw. Some days work is up, some days home is up, and you have to enjoy the ride. And I will tell you, I recounted that story and I got so many emails from working moms in our organization, leaders. So I was sending it out to about 200 senior leaders. And then one day I got an email from our CEO and he asked who I was sending it to. That was all the email had said was, what group does this go to? And so I will tell you, I'm not immune to creating my own stories. I thought, oh my gosh, am I overstepping? Should I? So I worked that up in my head and I reached back and let him know. And he said, have you considered sending it to all of our leaders? So then now these Fill Your Cup Friday emails go out to, we have about 3,000 leaders, close to 3,000 leaders in our organization. And it goes out to them every Friday. And I will tell you, between Fill Your Cup Friday and posting recognition videos on our recognition platform, when I round in the organization, people sometimes will say, oh, I know you, you're on Wombi. I see you all the time. Some of our team members will say that. But leaders come up to me and they're like, my son's at summer camp too, and here's what I struggled with. And so it became this really organic way to talk about leadership and talk about the importance of recognition and how we show up as committed coaches, but in a way that I think I can't say enough about how awesome it is to be out in an event and have a leader that I've never met in person before, especially during COVID, come up and talk to me about something and connect with me. It's cool too because I get different emails each week. It's not the same leaders. It's certain things that resonate with different individuals in the organization. So last week I had an email from one of our physicians and he was just like, this was great. It made my day. So, it's all different people, all different parts of the organization. And I think when you believe in storytelling and when you sort of live through that storytelling, different stories connect with different people, and it's been awesome.
So as we wrap up here and thinking about all the things that we've talked about, Tria, What is a piece of advice that, based on all that you've experienced in going through marketing and now over to the culture side of things and all the things we've discussed today, what is a big lesson or a key idea that you would leave our listeners with today?
I shared that the first year in this role was really, really difficult, and I hadn't heard what imposter syndrome was, but I definitely felt like that. I would love to share that. Take that big, bold move as a leader, you get there, right? If it's something that lights your soul on fire, but it feels fierce and it feels big and audacious and it's a little scary and you're a little uncomfortable, that's okay. Because you will get there and you will come out on the other side feeling so proud of the work you've done and so proud of the work that our organization has done. But it's worth taking that big, bold move when that opportunity presents itself.
A big thanks to Tria for sharing her very unique story with all of us. There are a couple of points of emphasis that I want to make as we wrap up this episode, and they both come from the what of leadership. And I make that distinction because so often here on the podcast, we're talking about the who of leadership. We're talking about how leaders need to show up as both inwardly sound and others focused. And there is no doubt that that is true. That's 3/4 of leadership. But occasionally we need to pause and talk about the what of leadership. These are the things that leaders do. And Tria talked about a number of things that are really exceptional, but 2 in that what of leadership category that I want to make mention of here are communicate effectively and marshaling resources. Now, on communicate effectively, you might have caught that quote that Tria said, it probably needs to go on a billboard or a bumper sticker. But that quote was, language can be beautiful, but not meaningful. There's so much packed into that phrase, and it is the example of something that is beautiful and meaningful. I mentioned that during the interview. I'm mentioning it again here because there is a reminder here that we need to be communicating effectively with the people we're leading. We need to think about how we're making things memorable, easy to recall, easy to lean on, and well understood. But there has to be substance behind it. It's not just a cute phrase. And I see this sometimes in organizations, frankly. I see where some people are more interested in how cute the phrase is than they are the substance behind it. And I think Tria's statement there that language can be beautiful but not meaningful, and that we need to avoid that we need to lean into what's meaningful and then get to the marketing side of communication, the ways in which we phrase things and how we package them so they'll be sticky for people to use them. That is an important step, but that we shouldn't start there. So that's a thought that I wanted to emphasize here with regard to communicating effectively. Now with regard to marshaling resources. One of the key ideas around marshaling resources isn't necessarily about the allocation of time and money, but the engagement of people. And as you listen to Tria's story about how they are developing the culture of the organization, it's remarkable for an organization of that size how small their direct team is, just a team of 3, counting Tria, but how many other people in the organization, the 50 culture champions, and then the culture circles that are involved with these culture champions, what they're doing is they're creating tentacles of responsibility and ownership into the organization. There's a real simple phrase to say to remember how all this works, and it goes like this: co-creation creates ownership. When you involve others in the development of solutions for whatever it is that you have going on in your organization, you're creating ownership. And what we know goes along with ownership is commitment. I'm reminded of a story of when I was in college many eons ago, and I was putting flyers up for an organization that I was a part of. I was the president of that organization, and I was letting people know through message boards, as you can imagine, pre-internet. Yep, that's how old I am. And I remember an advisor asking me why I wasn't eliciting the help of others to get these flyers up around campus. And my answer was I didn't want to burden that with other people. I wanted to serve the organization. And so I was riding my bike around campus at 1:00 in the morning, putting up the flyers about our meeting. And she said to me, "Look, Tim, I don't know if anybody's going to look at your flyers and show up for your meeting. But I'm pretty certain that if you have other people helping you put up the flyers, that they will be at the meeting. And that just really got my attention. I think back, it's been 30 years since I heard that message, and it has stuck with me all these years. And you heard a similar story going on with how Tria is growing and developing the culture of the organization. She is involving lots of people. There is co-creation, not just creation, but co-creation going on. And you listen to how she was willing to relinquish some control. And at times, the marketing side of her was cringing a little bit like, oh man, I would have maybe done that differently. But, oh wait, we're getting incredible results. People are committed. People have ownership in what we're doing. We're doing better things. We're doing smarter things. And we have greater buy-in to those smarter things because of co-creation. Co-creation creates ownership, and ownership leads to bigger commitment. And that's what you need in an organization when you're trying to grow, develop, and protect a culture. So all of that leads me to the question I want to leave you with today, and that is this. How often are you creating opportunities for co-creation with the people that you are leading? This is Tim Spiker reminding you to be worth following and to follow us wherever you get your podcasts. If you've heard something valuable today, please share our podcast with your friends and colleagues. And if you're up for it, leave us a 5-star review. Thanks for listening.